And there it is, major breaking news. Bernie Sanders has finally endorsed Joe Biden for the president of the United States, and we all knew he was going to do it. Bernie Sanders endorsed Hillary Clinton in 2016, yet this will still likely be seen as a major betrayal of the progressive left, which makes me wonder why anyone supported this guy in the first place. Now, I think the reason may be that progressives just saw Bernie as the best chance they had, even though he does try to play the establishment game. At least if he got elected, they'd get some policies put in place. But when Bernie Sanders dropped out of the race, we saw many people tweeting hashtag never Biden. I even saw some journalists saying, don't vote for Biden or Trump. And these are mainstream personalities in media. I had to wonder why it is there's a fracture between the left and the moderate Democrats. And I think the reason is actually kind of obvious. I've mentioned it before. A story from Politico came out earlier talking about how Democrats are really worried because of the YouTube deficit. YouTube political commentary tends to be conservative or moderate, or at least anti-Democrat. And they don't really know why, but they're desperately trying to make up this gap. I don't think they'll necessarily be able to do it. And one of the reasons is, when looking over at Pew Research, we can see that far left activists are substantially more active on social media in terms of rallying and protesting, thus creating their own kind of echo chamber. Moderate Democrats, conservatives, and even conservative Republicans are more likely to be doing the same thing. Now, I don't know if this is the reason or just another symptom of a bigger problem, but it stands to reason that if the far left is particularly active and constantly talking to themselves, they are spinning themselves up in a tizzy while the rest of us are off somewhere else, probably not paying attention that much. I mean, if you look at the top podcasts in the world, you've got mostly entertainment. Yet the Democrats are trying to chase after an activist base that is continually moving further and further left, away from mainstream America. This will result in more moderates thinking they're conservative because the far left dominates the conversation. But we'll get into all this. We have an interview from Ocasio Cortez where she basically says, in some ways, Hillary Clinton was better than Biden, and some of his policies are almost insulting. But the New York Times acknowledges that the progressives are not doing well. And even AOC recognizes this. In 2018, only a small handful of progressives actually won, and they won through an exploit called primarying. They do not represent the left in this country, but as long as the Democratic Party chases after them, they will not dominate on YouTube, they will not dominate on podcasts, and they certainly won't win these elections. Moderates in 2018 reclaimed Trump districts, not progressives. But let's get started. We'll start with the endorsement of Joe Biden. Before we do, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There are several ways you can give. The best thing you can do, share this video. As I mentioned, the establishment is cracking down on independent political commentary, channels like mine, because, well, maybe they want to be a bit more competitive, or maybe they're just very harsh. I don't know. Either way, if you want to help me overcome these algorithmic hurdles, how they prop up the mainstream media, then please consider sharing this video. Also, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button and the notification bell if you want to get more videos like this. CNBC breaking news, rather short story, Bernie Sanders endorses Joe Biden. They say that Sanders has endorsed Vice President Joe Biden for president on Monday during a live stream with the two men, telling Biden, "We need you in the White House." I'm asking every Democrat, I'm asking every independent, I'm asking a lot of Republicans to come together in this campaign to support your candidacy, which I endorse, Sanders said. Sanders exited the Democratic primary on Wednesday, effectively making Biden the presumptive nominee to take on President Donald Trump in November. Now, we also have this New York Times interview with Ocasio Cortez, kind of showing us this real rift. I mean, AOC is critical of Joe Biden. The reason I find this interesting is that Bernie Sanders literally just endorsed the guy and is calling on everyone to come together. Sorry, it's not going to happen. Let me just say it for the 15 millionth time. Joe Biden cannot be president. I mean, he physically can, and people might vote for him, but mentally he cannot. For all of the criticisms they've had about Donald Trump, the guy can actually form a sentence. Sometimes Trump rambles, sometimes you're confused by what he meant. But the fact is, Donald Trump is still a president, does still have a lot of support. Joe Biden can't form complete sentences. I get it. He does relatively often have some ideas he presents, but he flip-flops. He has no real position other than he's not Trump. In fact, The Atlantic wrote this article, I love citing this, that said, Joe Biden, stay alive. All we need is your warm corporeal form. That's it. They didn't actually care about anything Joe Biden stood for. They just don't want Trump. I'm sorry, but you can't run no one against someone. It's not going to work. Now, in this interview, the New York Times says Alexandria Ocasio Cortez has never spoken to Joe Biden. Here's what she would say. In an interview, AOC said she intended to support the presumptive Democratic nominee, but the process of coming together should be uncomfortable for everyone involved. No, it really shouldn't. The progressive left is a tiny fraction of this country. The Democrats should not be pandering to people who don't win anything. Here's what the New York Times says. The progressive wing of the Democratic Party fell flat in this year's presidential primary, and Rep. AOC knows it. Even before Senator Bernie Sanders dropped out of the race last week, making vice president the party's presumptive nominee, AOC was ruminating on the lessons the left must learn to be more successful moving forward. But in the short term, Democrats are desperate to defeat Donald Trump in November, and Mr. Biden is making some policy overtures to unite the party. The hope is to win over supporters of Mr. Sanders, as well as top surrogates like AOC, a New York congresswoman who is popular among young progressives, a group Mr. Biden is struggling to win. Now, look, the Democratic Party is completely split. But I'll tell you what, you have four groups. Let me just jump straight to this Pew research from 2018. Maybe out of date, it's a year and a half old or so. They say liberal Democrats more likely than other groups to be politically active on social media. I don't know if this is a symptom of a larger problem or the cause of it, but what we can see is it's very, very fascinating, actually. Liberal Democrats use social media for key civically minded activities more than other groups. We have four groups. These four groups are not proportionate, right? So just because you have conservative Republicans, moderate Republicans and Democrats and liberal Democrats doesn't mean that's proportionate to the population. But what we can see is something interesting. We see that conservative Republicans, moderate and liberal Republicans, and conservative and moderate Democrats are more likely to fall into the same bracket. Meaning, when asked, do they encourage others to take action on issues important to them? The three groups are aligned, for the most part, in the same area, where liberal Democrats are substantially more activisty. In every bracket, the liberal Democrats, meaning the more far-left progressives, are substantially more active on social media. I think this shows us two things. Moderate individuals, people who probably watch my channel, to even conservatives who, yes, many of whom rag on me very often, more right-leaning, less, moderates, they're more likely to watch this kind of content because we all kind of see similar things. We're less likely to be activists online screeching about hashtags and forming protests, and we're more likely to agree. And it may be because we agree, we're less likely to be fervent and vocal on the internet. It could be that the far left Democrats are being inundated with activist content, which pushes them in this direction away from everyone else. That doesn't really matter. What does matter is that far left Democrats and the rest of us are completely separated, which means so long as the Democrats chase after this fringe faction that doesn't make up a very large group at all, they're not going to represent me or anyone else in the middle. I love showing this graph. This is the hidden tribes more in common data. Let me look at these political parties. For those that are listening, I'll explain it to you. We have 7 major brackets: progressives, traditional liberals, passive liberals, the politically disengaged, moderates, traditional conservatives, and devoted conservatives. Interestingly, the progressive wing is only 8% of the population, according to this data. Traditional liberals, passive liberals, the politically disengaged, and moderates are all called the exhausted majority. Now, this is just one bit of data. Maybe it's not entirely correct. We can see devoted conservatives, which they symbolize with a MAGA, with what looks like a MAGA hat, make up 6% of the population. However, traditional conservatives make up 19%, meaning the right is 25% of this country, and the progressives are 8% of this country. Gallup released a poll saying the United States remained a center-right country ideologically. Chasing after a fringe faction that aren't even aligned with the regular liberals seems like it will make no sense. Your best bet is to cater more to moderate liberals. But they don't. And because they don't, I think that's why we see them fail when it comes to large media platforms. Now, it's true, there are some really big left-wing channels. There are some really big left-wing podcasts. They're not all aligned, though. We have in mainstream politics the intersectional feminists that dominate particularly well. But then you have certain dirtbag socialist type podcasts which do even better. The left is absolutely fractured. Now, I can't tell you exactly why, but I'm certainly evidence of it. I've never been a conservative. I grew up as a liberal, yet here I am being pushed into the right-wing side of things by people in the media. I mean, for the most part, they don't really know where to put me, but that's good enough. I agree with Bill Maher on most of the things he's complained about, and he's always been on the left. So the left is completely fractured. Which brings me to the next story where the Democrats are freaking out. Now, I didn't want to lead with another story about Democrats freaking out, especially when we have big breaking news. But this is extremely significant to this channel, to you as a viewer, and to what's going to happen in 2020. Politico says Democrats scramble to close YouTube deficit amid quarantine campaign. Concerned Democrats compare the right's advantage on YouTube to its dominance of talk radio. It's also true that the right, in my opinion, dominates podcasting. Within reason, there's an easy way to break this down. I looked up the top podcasting charts on Apple, Chartable, Spotify, and some other platforms. Sure enough, Joe Rogan is number one. I would actually call him decently lefty, but doesn't really fit in with a lot of these groups. He's more so a regular guy. He probably speaks to more moderates. You know what that means? Moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans are in the same place when it comes to the internet activism, as we see from Pew, which shows us the biggest faction in terms of entertainment on podcasting and probably on YouTube. I mean, Rogan's one of the biggest, YouTube channels as well. I mean, maybe not one of the biggest. That's not fair, but he does have a really, really big YouTube channel, gets millions of views. Moderates, man. Moderates are the key. Republicans, conservatives will watch moderate content. Moderates will watch moderates, conservatives will watch moderates, and the left won't. The left has fractured itself from the rest of us. So what happens if someone creates a fringe, far leftist socialist channel? Nobody wants to watch that either. There's a weird separation between where most of us exist and what we can agree on and the far left and their fringe ideas. But mainstream movies, celebrities, and the Democrats are chasing after vocal Twitter voices instead of America. It's why we've seen Get Woke, Go Broke. Now, that's not absolute. There are certainly things that have gotten woke and done well, but very often we see these weird attempts at wokeness that just fizzle out because you are chasing after a microscopic faction, not the majority of Americans. Politico mentions Joe Biden isn't much of a YouTuber, but his campaign and Democrats are hastily trying to address a long-standing weakness and reach the millions of Americans who are. They say while Democratic campaigns and groups spend heavily on advertising on YouTube, they lag in organic content. With dozens of conservative and right-wing figures like Ben Shapiro, Mark Dice, and Paul Joseph Watson, and more official-sounding channels like Prager University, cultivating enormous followings not yet matched by equivalents on the left. They go on to mention that's what led Biden to a live-streamed family town hall last Sunday night with a trio of YouTube family vloggers who have a combined 3.8 million subscribers. The Biden's campaign renewed efforts amid the pandemic have come with growing pains. The former vice president awkwardly started off by telling them, "You have really great podcasts." And the vloggers didn't post videos about the event on their own channels, restricting Biden to his smaller subscriber base of just 21,000 subscribers. Nobody likes Joe Biden. Nobody who has a choice goes to Joe Biden. Even Bernie Sanders, check this out. Bernie Sanders has 401,000 subscribers. This dude's running for president of the United States, one of the most popular on the internet, and I have more subscribers than him on multiple channels. You combine all my subscribers, I definitely have more than he does. Now, Bernie Sanders has way more Twitter followers. Sure. What's interesting to me is, as popular as Bernie Sanders is, he can't muster that support on YouTube. Probably because YouTube is comprised of people who choose to watch certain things. I think, it's fair to say people on Twitter will choose to follow certain people, but the people on Twitter seek you out, follow you. On YouTube, it's a search engine, meaning people are going to go on YouTube, search for a topic, and they're going to choose not to watch progressive content. I wonder why that is. Certainly, there are successful moderate Democrat voices and progressive voices, but they actually don't go that far left. Sure, you got the Young Turks, right? That's fair to point out, but they've been on YouTube for a really, really long time. They do get a ton of views. But you have some people like Kyle Kulinski. Kyle Kulinski is very progressive. He's actually had kind words to say about Sargon of Akkad, who is a liberalist anti-feminist. You also have David Pakman, who is also rather progressive liberal, and we certainly disagree. But he's also called out things. He's also called out social justice absurdities in the past, and he's also called out He's called out some Democrats and gotten yelled at for it. I'm not saying that these people are overly progressive. I'm just pointing out that if you look at some of these more far left channels, they tend not to do that well. People aren't choosing to go to them. For the most part, they're seeking more moderate voices. And it's not Joe Biden either. Joe Biden only has 23,400 subscribers. To be fair, I'll also point out Donald Trump only has 340,000 subscribers. So it's fair to say the old guard just isn't that good. Bernie Sanders does a lot better than Donald Trump does. But when it comes to personalities, it's conservatives. It's conservatives and it's moderates and it's people who push back on the mainstream narrative. I really think that the biggest driving factor about social media, it's not so much whether or not you're conservative. I think it has more to do with whether or not you are giving people an honest take on what's going on. I do think there are progressive YouTubers who lie all the time. And I tend to find that there will be conservatives who are either lying or just wrong. But then there's a big group of successful people who are more probably moderate or right-leaning who present a fair argument. I was looking at some of these arguments from progressives. I decided not to show them and single anybody out because, I'd be calling out one or two things. I don't want to start any flame wars. But there are certain takes where it seems like they're just being dishonest. Maybe you agree with me and that's why you don't want to watch them. I've certainly recommended some other progressive channels so you can get a balanced view of things. When I watch someone like Joe Rogan, for instance, and I see his content, it feels like while he's been wrong on many things, and I've certainly, had criticisms, I think Joe's a good dude. I think he's pretty smart, actually, as much as he might be self-deprecating. But he's being honest. And, Joe has recently had some kind words for me. I really appreciate it. But I think that's my intent as well. I'm absolutely wrong on a ton of things. But I try not to misframe things, and I try to make sure that the facts I present to you are fair and honest. My assessment may be incorrect. I may have opinions you disagree with, but I will never lie by omission or try to falsely frame certain things like I've seen progressives do. And I think the reason they do it is because they have no choice but to do this in order to pander to certain groups. In fact, David Pakman once put out a video saying there's a bunch of subjects he can't talk about without getting, slammed by many progressives or, left-wing activists. And that was really honest of the guy. And that's why I think he's a pretty good dude, albeit he may be wrong. What I think we're seeing is the Democrats are going after a base that no one actually cares about. AOC was a fluke. She's won. I think there were 79 progressives and only a small handful actually won. She did not win the majority of her district. She does not represent this country. If the Democrats want to win on YouTube, you need to actually have probably a sane voice similar to mine. Well, I think so because I actually supported Democrats, not to toot my own horn, but the point I'm trying to make is I supported some Democrats for their ideas, even though I didn't completely agree with them. The problem is when they go on TV, they say things like no border controls, moratorium on deportations. We're going to jump straight to banning private health care. And I'm like, dude, none of us are there. I grew up as a lefty my whole life. And I've become more centrist because the Democrats have tried to leave us behind to latch onto a tiny fraction of the public no one cares about. I mean, I get it. These activists care about themselves, but it is a losing game. And while all of this is going on, we have a media that completely recognizes the Democrats. Not only have they been doing this, but that Trump and conservatives are winning the internet. Completely winning the internet. Look, people say that I've seen people say online that I must be a Trump supporter for ragging on the Democrats all the time. No, that's not the case. I'm just being honest. I don't understand why Nancy Pelosi thinks an oversight committee. I don't understand why Adam Schiff thinks an investigation. I don't understand what they're doing. And I've tried looking up what they're doing. It doesn't seem to make sense. And I'll say that. It doesn't mean I like Donald Trump. It means I don't like what they're doing. And it's true, YouTubers tend to be pretty anti-things. Fine, that's fair. I don't like what they're doing. I have had tremendous praise for Andrew Yang, Democrat. Tremendous praise for Tulsi Gabbard, Democrat. I've had some criticisms for them too. I feel like I'm sitting here in the middle, not necessarily even in the middle, looking for a viable option. And what do I get? Joe Biden can't talk straight. I will never support that. Bernie Sanders wants to ban private healthcare. That's rather extreme. I like the idea of universal healthcare, but that's going a bit far. Even Denmark doesn't do that. All we get are extreme positions, and I don't necessarily understand why, other than what I've shown you from Pew. Liberal, far leftists, whatever you want to call them, are so active online. These Democrats only see that, and they think that's what the American people want. They accuse me of being conservative, but I've been in the same place I've always been. Bernie Sanders was for border security not that long ago. Now he's changed his mind. It's not me who's changed. It's me saying, what are you guys doing? Joe Biden now adopting progressive policies to convince one congresswoman that he's progressive enough. It's not enough. You are sacrificing moderates to win over people who don't like you anyway. And they won't support you anyway. They've said as much. So why are you trying to court them? I honestly have no idea. Bernie Sanders, I think he understands it. I do not trust Bernie at all, considering he thinks Joe Biden should be president. I'm sorry. You have not convinced me that Trump is that bad, that we should have someone like Joe Biden who can't form a sentence as the president. And again, Joe Rogan even says it. So you want to talk about the domination of certain ideas online? It's mind-blowing to me that actually, I'm pretty sure they do this in the Politico article. They say this. Prager University is one example of the right's extensive YouTube ecosystem. The relatively obscure channel has 2.45 million subscribers. I'm sorry, how do you reconcile that, Politico? How could PragerU be relatively obscure but have 2.5 million subscribers? That makes them one of the biggest channels in the world. Check this out. They say it generates over 3 billion views with a steady stream of videos like Why I Left the Left with 13 million views and Make Men Masculine Again with 9.5 million views. The media is a part of this mess. And as long as the Democrats don't snap themselves out of it and come back to reality, they will just keep losing. I do not understand what they think they're going to win by chasing after people who hate them and say they will never vote for them. But let me just give that shade to the media. That's the bigger point I wanted to make. I think what actually unites these channels, right? I'm not particularly conservative, but I'm fairly anti-establishment, anti-mainstream. And as long as the media will prop up Joe Biden like the New York Times just did, you'll see me calling that out. It's not about me liking Trump or wanting him to win. Many of these people on the left, they can't seem to understand that, think everything is wrapped in this mission of tribalism. I'm not. I'll tell you this. If the media is going to call out Brett Kavanaugh but defend Joe Biden, I will call the media for lying. Politico says Prager University is relatively obscure, but they've got 2.5 million subscribers. You've lost your mind. That is not obscure. That is popular. A video with 13 million views, 9.5 million views. I would only hope for that kind of viewership, and so would Joe Biden. He doesn't get it. Neither does Bernie Sanders. You are not in the mainstream, but you think you are. It's the craziest thing to me. When Donald Trump's polling was skyrocketing, and it's been going up, it's bounced down a little bit. It was going up amid the coronavirus, reaction. The people in media and these activists were just saying, I don't believe it's true. Listen, you are not in the majority. You have never been in the majority. That's why you were wrong in 2016. It's why you're wrong now. And it's why the Democrats are going to lose. They haven't learned a single lesson. They keep chasing the same nonsense. Daily Caller reports the Trump campaign raised $212 million in the first quarter of 2020, brings election cycle total to $677 million. We know from all of these stories, Democrats are learning the wrong lesson from Donald Trump. He ran as a moderate and it worked. July 2019. Here's The Atlantic. Will the left go too far? So for some reason, they can. There's no. Maybe it's the fact that they trust the media. Maybe that's really what it's about. Because the media doesn't have a cohesive message either. I mean, even Vox is saying you got to get moderate. The one thing they all seem to agree on is that the far left is not a good idea, but they're going after it anyway. While all of this insanity occurs, Trump is his polls are going up. He's raising hundreds of millions of dollars. He's now tied with Biden in a new Fox News poll. I don't know what to tell you, man. Bernie Sanders' endorsement is worth nothing as far as I'm concerned. Because the people who like Bernie Sanders do not make up what most Americans actually want. I think there are many people who like Bernie. I think there are many good people who like Bernie. I think there are many honest people who like Bernie. But Bernie was pandering to people who aren't going to vote and who don't make up the majority. Let me just give you the basic example. Bernie Sanders said last year, we cannot have open borders. There's too many poor people. Bernie Sanders said in an interview recently that bringing in undocumented immigrants will depress wages for low-skilled workers. Now he's flip-flopping on those positions to pander to the far left. Most Americans don't agree. Bernie, you lost. While some of your positions were popular and people do like the idea of Medicare for all, He went too far with it, and then he tried wrapping himself around these weirdo activists who have fringe opinions and don't vote. Biden is making the same mistake. Biden's even accepting the Bernie endorsement. It's a mistake. Don't get me wrong. I think there's a possibility Biden will win, especially if Trump supporters get complacent. Then hubris will be their downfall. But for now, we can see at the same day that Bernie Sanders has endorsed Joe Biden, Ocasio Cortez has slammed Joe Biden and said that some of his policies are almost insulting. It should show you that Bernie's endorsement is worthless. The far left does not want Biden. They don't care. And the Democrats need to stop playing these games, but they're going to keep doing it. I'll leave it there. Next segment will be coming up at 6 p.m. youtube.com/TimCastNews. Thanks for hanging out. I'll see you all then.